because our national grid makes us so powerful, and because it is so exposed, antiquated, and fragile, so fragile a squirrel can take it down with a bite. Our national grid not only makes us powerful, it makes us vulnerable. And in that sense, powerlessness at the moment to protect ourselves means we have a long way to go.
And now, The Edwin Black Show. Sponsored by the books of Edwin Black, available on Amazon and at booksellers worldwide. And now, here's Edwin.
Hello, I'm Edwin Black, investigative journalist, historian, and human rights author of 300 editions in 40 languages in 190 countries worldwide, including IBM and the Holocaust, War Against the Weak, and my latest scoop book, Israel Strikes Iran. Right there. Ours is a show for opinion makers and decision makers, not mass clicks. You can subscribe for alerts at theedwinblackshow.com. And if you want to support our work, we need your assistance. Please visit theedwinblackshow.com/support. Your help, big or small, assures our complete and utter intellectual and uncensored journalistic independence. Go to theedwinblackshow.com/support and keep us independent. And yes, I mean you. Today's episode is made possible and sponsored without any preconditions, requests, or stipulations by my just released scoop bestseller, Israel Strikes Iran, Operation Rising Lion, available everywhere across the planet in 12 paper, electronic, and audio editions, and co-sponsored by members of the Jewish community of Orange County, California. That said, remember, I only speak for myself, and the same goes for my guests. Today, we welcome viewers from across America, including our 5 watch parties. Actually, there's only 4. One of them is overseas. And that's in the Villages, Newton, Mass, Chicago, and Tampa Bay. It's Harvey. And now Panama City. Overseas, I see viewers logged on from most of our usuals. That's Australia. I see New Zealand, Great Britain again, Canada, Germany, Holland, France, Poland, thank you, Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, Panama as usual, and Israel, plus other countries. The Edwin Black Show, along with our YouTube site, speaks frankly and without tremor to a fragmented world seeking better understanding of our tormented past, our present very, very tense, and a turbulent future still uncertain. By the way, stay tuned for my special word of wisdom at the very end of the show, just before I sign off. Before we dive into our latest installment on The Grid, let's cover some pressing topics. Our world is burning, and in so many places. Item 1, the work of Operation Rising Lion is not over. That is, the lion does not sleep tonight. Iran did not learn its lesson, and even now is trying to reconstitute its air defenses and nuclear program. Air defenses, they're going for the Chinese HQ-12 and the HQ-16, which imitate American and Russian systems. They're easy to defeat. Most poignantly, the wishy-washy European partners in the still operative JCPOA have now got the gumption to formally declare that if Iran does not reinstate the inspection safeguards or commence negotiations to do the same crippling UN-wide sanctions, then those will be reimposed. Iran experts call snapback sanctions the most powerful diplomatic tool ever devised, and ironically, it was Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov who designed it when the original JCPOA was signed a decade ago. Make no mistake, Iran's theocratic suicidal regime is on life support because its humiliating defeats and because of naturally occurring water shortages that threaten to topple the regime. Iran's aquifers and water reservoirs are near empty, in the midst of a super hot summer with temperatures reaching, get this, 122 degrees Fahrenheit, that is 50 degrees centigrade. A desperate Iranian regime is hoping to quickly import water from regional countries such as Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, and Tajikistan. That won't do it. Yes, the regime constructed hundreds of dams in past decades, but mismanagement, reckless diversion, and neglect have emptied them. Iran's main reservoir, Lake Urmia, is almost empty, and what's left from evaporation is now salty and brackish. Tehran's 10 million residents have been warned they will run out of water within weeks. Everyone knows that in the prior decade, Iran diverted financial resources from restoring its precious water resources to its nuclear bomb program. People are thirsty, and they know why. It's mullah mismanagement and the resulting disastrous drought, the water crisis, the threat of snapback, and Tehran's military vulnerability has pushed the mullah maniacs to desperation. Tehran is now openly threatening to hit America's eastern seaboard cities with 2,000-mile missiles launched from its militarized sea tankers, and the same goes for France, Germany, and Great Britain. They've all been threatened if snapback sanctions, which would throw the country into a devastating economic chaos if those are triggered. At the same time, Tehran's efforts to refortify Hezbollah in Lebanon are badly faltering. The legitimate government in Lebanon is demanding Hezbollah disarm and Iranian influence recede. The major Christian community there has spoken through Maronite Patriarch Bashara al-Rahi, who has joined in the demand that Hezbollah disarm. Quote, this is from the Patriarch, the Shiite community has had enough of wars and wants to live in peace, and there's a full Lebanese consensus on Hezbollah's disarmament, close quote. Now the Patriarch added openly that Lebanon can make, quote, peace with Israel when the time is right. In addition, the axis of resistance through Syria is now completely deconstructed. Ron Dermer, Israeli Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu's right-hand man, has just days ago met in Paris with Syrian Foreign Minister Assad al-Shaibani to discuss regional stability and even joining, get this, the Abraham Accords. This sit-down was brokered by the United States, which is doing its utmost to work for peace in the Middle East. Now, what's the point of me bringing all this out? The point is that when maniacs are desperate, they act maniacally. The most astute military men in Washington, Jerusalem, Tehran, and across the Middle East believe a renewed war between Israel and Iran could break out at any moment, and we would see more bombing by Trump. Iranian officials promise this would be the last war, implying nuclear devastation of the United States and Europe. You can understand the dynamics of this entire process with my book, Israel Strikes Iran. But know this, the world witnessed the miracle of Operation Rising Lion. Yet the lion does not sleep tonight. The lion is preparing to rise again at any moment. Item 2, the death of the legacy media. It's time for good and thoughtful people to stop caring what the legacy media reports. I refer to the Pravda press, such as the Associated Press, Reuters, NBC, CNN, Washington Post, New York Times, MS Now, that's the new name for MSNBC, just spun off from Comcast, and CBS, whose own controlling stockholder, Sherry Redstone, just admitted in a newspaper interview that CBS has a blatant anti-Israel bias. Their serial monstrous malpractices, such as the Russia hoax, the Hunter Biden laptop hoax, the COVID origin hoax, and the Joe Biden mental collapse cover-up is a historic bad with no equal. Even one of those mistakes would have disbarred a journalist for life. But taken together, they create a web of misinformation, disinformation, and pivotal omission that permanently taints every word they now type or broadcast. The golden age of American journalism has faded. I personally get my news, you could write this down, from Fox, JNS, and a virtually unlimited network of up-to-the-minute reporting sources on location. So to balance your mental processes when you access news from the likes of CNN, ABC, the Washington Post, and the New York Times, just know you aren't getting the full story, you're not getting balance, and accuracy is no longer an ipso facto. In all the journalism classes I've addressed in the past decades, there's not even been one student who failed to say they would pursue a profession in journalism just to be an activist. During those decades, committed old-time journalists like me have retired, passed from the scene, or otherwise been replaced by activist ideologues masquerading as journalists. So relax your mind, folks, and take the news from the legacy outlets with a teaspoon of coarse ground salt and sometimes a chuckle. You'll feel better, and they won't. Item 3, the question of Palestinian statehood is front and center. Canada, Australia, France, and the UK are now promising to announce recognition at the forthcoming United Nations session. No demand for hostages to return, no demand for mutual recognition of the Jewish state, no guarantees for demilitarization, no promise to live in peace, no assurance that Iran will not smuggle in rockets. The world is approaching, ladies and gentlemen, another Munich moment when the killer society will be rewarded and elevated for killing Jews on October 7th and for their adherents provoking daily assaults in Brooklyn, Sydney, London, Paris, and Athens. We had a two-state solution. It was called Jordan, which was created in 1922 with a Churchill memo out of thin air from 77% of the Jewish mandate created by the League of Nations. We had another one with the Palestinian Authority, which took 16% of its foreign donated billions to pay salaries to terrorists. And we had a third one in Gaza, which used its billions in foreign aid to create a suicide society that cheered and handed out candies when Israeli women were mass raped and babies burned in ovens, and they worked to convert their irrigation and water pipes into missile tubes and construct hundreds of miles of attack tunnels without a single bomb shelter. Remember, even the angry Gazans now railing against Hamas, they only want new leadership to achieve the same goal of Jewish destruction. Now Hamas creates strategic starvation with fake photos, one of which was mismanaged so badly it showed a grieving mother with 3 hands cradling her allegedly starving baby. Anything is possible with a gullible, biased, and complicit media such as the New York Times, which we think maybe is about to be sued for its egregious falsities in this regard. You can talk about a Palestinian state in another decade, in another generation, in another lifetime, in another iteration of Palestinian humanity, one that wishes to live in peace. Until that time, the Jews of the world, half of whom live in Israel, better get ready for another Holocaust. I'm talking to you, Mr. Comfortable, Miss Trump hater, or Mrs. Trump hater. It will never come to that, you believe. Hitler came to power January 30th, 1933. They talked about the Holocaust and worked on the mechanisms for 6 years before war broke out, and it was 9 years before the killing camps came into being. A Palestinian state will burn at the core of this next Holocaust, just as it did during the last one with the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem. Get your head out of your tuchus. You think you are comfortable. I assure you, the Jews in 1932 also thought they were comfortable. Item 4, political anti-Semitism in America is now entrenched. There's a fascist trend in the Republican Party, which has been condemned by Trump and his entire political stratum. Here I refer to the new recruit to the wacko realm. That's Tucker Carlson, also Marjorie Taylor Greene, who introduced us to Jewish lasers from outer space, completely crazy Candace Owens, and others. The bad news is these people are among the loudest voices in the Republican Party. The good news is these people, despite their volume and luminosity, are in truth minor factors in the Republican Party. And now they represent only the outliers. Yes, these outliers are out there lying, but they're not influencing the path of the Republican Party. Much more dangerous is the fact that the Democratic Party has now become the openly stated enemy of the Jewish people and Israel. The wonderful voices of the Democratic Party, such as John Fetterman, Richie Torres, both presidential timber, have now been overtaken by socialists, communists, America haters, and the Arab street. These elements have devoured and overtaken the Democratic Party's base, and its irrepressible new leaders are either confirmed Jew haters and Israel haters, such as New York mayoral candidate Zohran Mamdani, who is receiving strategic help from Barack Obama, who his former friend Alan Dershowitz rightly called, quote, an enemy of the Jewish people, close quote. Then there's Somali American Omar Fateh, who won the primary for mayor and is now running on the Democratic ticket to take over Minneapolis as mayor. His communications advisor posted that, quote, Israel does not have a right to exist and, quote, needs to be dismantled, close quote. Among Fatah's backers is the Pakistani Imam Assad Zaman, who previously promoted a pro-Hitler film and just hours after October 7 praised Hamas. Now we see that even an erudite thinking Democrat, such as Pete Buttigieg, was days ago pressured to change his support for Israel and falsely condemn it for a genocide. Self-defense is not genocide. Let me say it again. Self-defense, vigorous or otherwise, is not genocide. Virginia delegate Sam Razul, who chairs the Education Committee in the Virginia House of Delegates, has himself labeled Zionism evil and a supremacist ideology. The future of the Democratic Party is not Fetterman, it's Fatah, Mamdani, AOC, Rashida Tlaib. If the Democrats regain power, they will waste no time, not even an hour, purging Jews, disenfranchising Jews, assaulting Israel. Sadly, my words will fall on deaf ears because the majority of Jews still vote Democrat like I used to, like my parents did, like so many did. Yes, Jews in double digits have abandoned the party of Israel and Jew hatred for either independence or the Republican Party. But that's not enough. I know you don't think the train will stop in your neighborhood. History proves you wrong. That's ancient history. That's recent history. And contemporary history. Right now, contemporary history. Don't vote for the train. And now, before we get to our tremulous investigation of the grid, just to follow up on the lawsuit against UNRWA announced on this show previously. Well, it has now been filed, and the man behind that suit, one of America's most eminent of international jurists, Richard Heidemann, is here to tell us more. Richard, please take the screen and the mic.
Thank you, Edwin, and hello to everyone. As you know, our law firm, Heidemann, Noodleman and Kalick in Washington, D.C., for more than 20 years has been filing cases against Libya, Syria, Iran, the Palestinian Authority, Arab Bank, and others we've accused of funding and providing material support or aiding and abetting terror. In the context of October 7th, you should know before October 7th, we were taking a hard look at UNRWA for a long time, because in the UNRWA schools, they teach such hate, not only in Gaza, but also elsewhere, including in Judea and Samaria. UNRWA uses a curriculum that is full of hate and encourages martyrdom. As a result of October 7th, and on behalf of both clients who are victims of terror from before October 7th, on October 7th, and since October 7th, we have now filed last week an action against UNRWA. That's the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees in the Near East. I've made this point before, but I need to make it again. Every refugee in the world is resettled through United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, and they're resettled in countries. They're given new homes, new passports, relief, and support. The only refugees that are handled differently are those where the grandparents come out of the original lands that were part of the partition resolution. Moreover, other refugees are not just resettled, they're given freedom. The Palestinian refugees are kept in camps as demonstration vehicles to show how bad Israel is. UNRWA itself has a U.S. arm. It's called the UNRWA USA National Committee, Inc. UNRWA USA is a U.S. charity, has an office right here in Washington, D.C. So we have sued both UNRWA and UNRWA USA. The approximately 200 plaintiffs include victims, survivors, and family members of individual murders, rapes, maiming, injuries, and those that have been taken hostage. The complaint alleges that UNRWA intentionally and materially supported Hamas, Hezbollah, and other terror organizations in the years leading up to October 7th and since, enabling the group's genocidal campaign through aid diversion, indoctrination of hate as taught and encouraged in UNRWA schools, the concealment of weaponry in UNRWA facilities, and direct involvement by UNRWA's paid employees in the Hamas terror attacks. This is a case seeking justice and accountability against an entity that holds itself out as humanitarian, but has utterly failed in its mission and purpose while unconscionably providing material support for terror. Indeed, the slaughter, rape, and kidnapping of innocents is a gross violation of international law, and it indeed is appropriately punishable in the courts of the United States under applicable statutes. The victims and their families demand justice, and they deserve it now. The complaint, you should know, has a few arms to it. Accusations of facilitation of Hamas's influence over the Gaza population, provision of access and use of UNRWA schools and clinics and vehicles for store and transport of weapons, and for providing aid to other terrorist infrastructure needs. The use of hate and indoctrination in the UNRWA schools and its role in radicalizing Palestinian youth and legitimizing violence against Israeli, American, and other civilians. Sweeping entanglement with Hamas controlled entities. Everybody forgets about the hostages. Shamefully. But everybody forgets that on October 7th, people from 42 countries were maimed, murdered, or taken hostage. Where are all those prime ministers and foreign ministers? We've called before for the release of the hostages, and we'll see if that develops. But one thing is clear. UNRWA itself participated actively with Hamas terrorists. UNRWA personnel participated, and somebody has to hold them accountable. And this litigation is designed to seek justice and accountability. Thank you, Edwin.
That was an extraordinary rendering, so visceral. It just grips each of us because we all know how quintessentially true and accurate it is. Have you served your lawsuit?
The lawsuit has not yet been served. Actually, we've been contacted by a number of other law firms who have asked if we would consider jointly with them representing their clients and including them. And so an amended complaint is in the process of being prepared. In addition, Edwin, it's worth noting that another lawsuit, one that we have an excellent relationship with and a high regard for, they had filed a case in Delaware where UNRWA USA is actually incorporated. They had filed that case on behalf of a very few families. Excellent law firm. They do great work. The judge just recently in that Delaware case dismissed the case, stating that it failed to state a cause of action against UNRWA USA on various grounds. We are thoroughly examining that judge's opinion because our case is pending in the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia. In our amended complaint, we will be addressing outlined deficiencies that the judge in Delaware has noted. And so we will be filing within the next few weeks an amended complaint, after which service will commence.
This is actually a lawsuit for the ages. It'll be a turning point in the history of the Middle East, and Godspeed to you. Thank you very much, Richard. We will have you back to report as soon as there's further information. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we jump into one of the most complex, fascinating, and societally fraught questions of our day, a topic which powers our world, but is not front and center for our world. I speak of electricity and our connectivity and its interwoven mystical lattice known as the grid, the giant network that makes us the society that we are. This topic is so immense. I spent years studying this to write my award-winning book, Internal Combustion. Got it right here. Wrote another one on what happens when our oil stops. Internal Combustion won the Thomas Edison Award and a Rock Hour Editorial Award for the best book of the year and some other accolades. Power, ladies and gentlemen, power is the ability to transform energy into work, and it is both mystical and self-defining. Remember, all power corrupts, and the ability of a society or segment of society to power itself has indeed summoned the darkest forces of government and corporate control, which are the mandatory co-ingredients of our own self-governance. How many people have died? How many lands have been invaded? How many peoples have been subjugated for that black substance, petroleum, representing prior life that after centuries became known as oil? How many wars have been fought so a barrel can be extracted and shipped from the Middle East, endowing our citizens with the ability, the almighty ability, to drive 3 blocks and purchase a gallon of milk and know the unknowable, because no one, past or present, understands electricity. I received special federal permission to be the first person to review Thomas Edison's closed papers in his New Jersey mansion where they are stored. When he retired, Edison, after 70 years of electrical science, study, pioneering, and commercialization, he was asked how electricity worked. He answered, "I don't know." No one, no scientist, no electrical engineer, no inventor can explain why the Almighty God created subatomic particles that repel and attract each other to create the electrical connection that makes things move. Oh yes, you can capture electricity, you can measure it, and you can generate it. You just can't explain it. Ladies and gentlemen, you can call it magic or call it God or combine those ideas and call it nature. Whatever, it's still mystic. Ask most people where electricity comes from, and they will say from beyond the wall socket. But what's behind that wall socket? It's wires that connect to 33,000 substations. And these interconnect to 300 to 400 transmission stations, which in turn are wired to 660,000 miles of high voltage electricity cables strung across thousands of transmission towers. These towers are fed by the actual source of electricity, whether that is a solar farm, a coal-fired plant, or a nuclear facility. Solar and wind are minor producers of electricity, generally functioning at 15 to 20% efficiency. The real font of electricity, the real power behind electricity, is steam, which drives a turbine that touches contact points that generate all that precious electrical charge. We boil water with the heat of burning coal, or the heat of a nuclear rod, or a flaming plume of natural gas. They all create boiling water with the steam turning giant turbines. Dams such as Hoover do the same thing, not with steam, but with the actual water. Electricity, once created, must either be used, transported for use, stored, or lost through dissipation. This is where batteries come in. Electricity at its source must be mighty and powerful enough to travel across the mountains and the counties of the United States, but then it must be restricted and stepped down at transmission and local substations so it is weak enough to work with your hair dryer or your flat screen TV. From so many connection points, the national grid is created. It connects everyone and everything, and it can disconnect everyone and everything all at once, depending upon the safeguards and the lockdown procedures installed in all substations and transmission points. All of this, all these towers, all these networks, they're all privately owned by regulated monopolies, the utilities we know. In the old days, I mean the first half of the 20th century, electricity was new to many areas, and most of the electrical companies were owned by gangsters. Let me say that again, gangsters. I mean actual mobsters with machine guns who murdered anyone who got in their way. This was particularly true in Minneapolis, St. Paul. That's a long story, and you'll have to read my book to get the details. But to fight back, Franklin Delano Roosevelt rammed through a still active law known as PUCA, P-U-H-C-A. That is the Public Utility Holding Company Act of 1935, also known as the Wheeler-Rayburn Act, giving Congress and states the right to regulate, force divestment, and price control the electricity. That, of course, means it has meant that thousands of politicians went on the tab and became enriched to ensure the utilities were regulated in a way they found profitable. After World War II, the utilities eventually traded in their Tommy guns and stiletto knives for "We Carry" advertising, pretty logos, and wonderful t-shirts. So now they act like just a bunch of good guys obeying regulation bought and paid for with their lobbyists, all to ensure that we pay a fortune for electricity and they have artwork in the boardroom. With the advent of data centers, right now, today, this week, more demand is being placed on our local grid. So excess demand and deliberately structured limited supply, they create this limited supply by the way they disconnect and connect with their neighbors. It means that our electricity utilities must surcharge, and voila, we pay through the nose. I'm paying hundreds of dollars extra a month for the same amount of electricity I was paying last year. In New Jersey, people are up in arms because the regulators have been in bed with the utilities themselves, and Governor Phil Murphy just signed two bills into law last Friday to increase transparency around these shadowy decisions made by the company known as PJM Interconnection. That's the company that runs the electricity grid across New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, and parts of all of 10 other states. The entire U.S. grid is divided into 3 major corporate control regions. The Eastern Interconnection, east of the Rocky Mountains, the Western Interconnection from the Pacific Ocean to the Rocky Mountains, and the Texas Interconnected System. But there are many more subdivisions, and when we add in Canada, it gets even more complex, not to mention companies. But all of it is regulated by one entity, the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, NERC, which functions as a government-created nonprofit corporation based in Atlanta, Georgia. NERC was created and then recreated in 2006 in the wake of the first large-scale blackout in November of 1965. Our grid can go down. Some of it, a bunch of it, perhaps all of it. It all depends on the source of the problem. A main fear is a foreign adversary such as North Korea, China, Russia, or Iran fear that they will detonate an EMP bomb, that is an electromagnetic pulse bomb, that will fry circuits in everything electric. An adversary can detonate one high in the atmosphere, or it could be in a small box on the ground, and it would permanently destroy every connected wire unless those wires are hardened, as the military has done. But even the most hardened devices, like a tank, have interconnected, unhardened parts that will take the machine or device down. EMPs are no longer theoretical. The US, China, Israel, and Russia all know how to deploy EMPs. You can't recover from an EMP. You must rebuild. Or if you don't want a trackable EMP bomb, just send a team of agents, perhaps 1 or 2 guys, to the thousands of unprotected transmission stations that we see on every highway with a little fence around it saying private property. Just lob in a grenade, maneuver a kamikaze drone, or toss in some little aluminum strips to short circuit it, and the station is down. So in any war setting, our grid is target 1. Even more likely, too much use for air conditioning in hot times, data centers going up left and right, or charging stations for a fleet of Tesla semi-trucks, and this blackout is more likely to occur. Remember, Paris was thrown into a deadly blackout that killed so many because of soaring summer heat. Tehran is facing the same threat now, and they worry about a blackout any moment. High winds, ice, and other climate conditions can do the same thing. I remember Washington, D.C. went without electricity for 11 days because of an ice storm. Nowadays, we have neighboring repair crews. They come in giant fleets, but it still takes days of darkness to recover from a hurricane or a snowstorm. Yet some of the biggest blackouts on record have been caused by squirrels, which like to chew electrical wires. From late May 2013, this is just an example, to the end of August 2013, some 50 power outages in 24 states were caused by squirrels. They even have a technical abbreviation for it, POCBS. That is a power outage caused by squirrel. So the point is, when the lights go out, the bad stuff comes in, and we are powerless and disconnected. They have made many movies about the Great Blackout of New York. Most say strengthen the grid with more power generation. It takes years to get a power plant improved, even though lame Joe Biden made it a 10 to 20-year prospect, and even though they now claim they can contract that into a 3 to 4 year process, we're still years away from enhancing the grid with more power and more distribution. I say something else. Focus on a movement with the misleading name distributed energy, or you would better understand it as decentralized energy. You don't get your air conditioning from miles away in the city center, so why not generate your own electricity? The modern term now being bandied around is microgrids. These small generation networks can connect one home or a group of homes. In New York, the Durst Property Company installed a microgrid on one floor of a single building. It can be done. That's in Manhattan. But we need a totally new approach to capture, store, and utilize our energy to generate electricity. We need to capture the rain in our gutters, wind in little couplets, does not have to be windmills, and sunshine and high efficiency tiles. Panels just won't work, we need tiles. And we need to capture the pressure from our own footsteps, store it all in power walls like Tesla makes, power our own homes and perhaps a group of connected homes, and what we're not using, that can be sent off to other microgrids. Micronuclear is now broadly discussed. That is a nuclear reactor 100 times smaller than a nuclear plant, generating just 20 megawatts. It is so small, it can be towed by an ordinary truck and then buried for usage. Idaho National Labs is working on this right now, and they have corporate partners. Remember, nuclear submarines have used micro-nuclear reactors for decades. Ironically, it is Trump who is championing microgrids, inviting all of these factories, data centers, and research labs to build their own energy source, feeding the grid with the excess. Because our national grid makes us so powerful, and because it is so exposed, antiquated, and fragile, so fragile a squirrel can take it down with a bite. Our national grid not only makes us powerful, it makes us vulnerable. And in that sense, powerlessness at the moment to protect ourselves means we have a long way to go. This is only the first of a series of discussions on our national grid, which is the basis for both our national stature and our national fragility. And now I will take your questions. Okay, from the watch party in the villages, who controls our electricity? Our electricity is controlled by I'm going to use this word, a cabal of regulators, controlled by a cabal of corporate interlopers, lobbyists who ensure that our rates are sufficiently high that they can afford to exist the way they are. I wonder if the energy highway, the electrical highway, should be considered public property the way our national highway is considered public property. And so that's why I'm in favor of microgrids. Remember, when you ask the utility like Pepco here, or in Florida, it's FP&L, or Con Ed in New York, when you ask them why they do anything, why they charge what they do, they'll always say, we have to obey the regulations. What they don't say is those regulations are bought and paid for, they're announced, they're reacted to, and favor is curried. And so that's the answer to your question. Who controls our electricity? Not you. It's a complex of corporations, mini grids, interstate grids, and in fact, a giant North American grid. Thank you for your question. From the watch party in Newton, Mass, what happened in Canada with an October 7th film? I'm happy you mentioned that. I didn't have time to deal with it, but the Toronto International Film Festival, TIFF, is one of the most prestigious and commercially important film festivals in the world. With my involvement with Hollywood on some of my projects, I'm very well aware that whatever is said and done at the Toronto International Film Festival can be live or die for a movie that's seeking to come out to the broader market. There was a film called Out of Nowhere about October 7th. It was a documentary. And the judges at TIFF got political because Canada is rapidly becoming a fascist and anti-Semitic state. I want to say that again. If you have a vacation plan for Canada, cancel it. If you were thinking of buying some maple syrup, forget that. Buy it from Vermont. If you were thinking of scheduling a convention in beautiful Banff or Toronto, change that, okay? We have to punish Canada for what they have become. They've been great, but now they've become something very, very violent and very, very bad when it comes to Jews. So TIFF said that they couldn't put this documentary down because you're not going to believe this. I hope everybody is sitting down. They didn't have a film license from Hamas. Let me say that again. TIFF said you can't run this footage because you don't have a license, a film license from Hamas. After there was a huge uproar, they finally agreed that they would allow the film to be screened, but only if they changed the name from Out of Nowhere, because they're claiming that October 7th was not out of nowhere. The Jews brought it upon themselves, and they would only screen it once in a private showing and without any media or audience present. Shame on TIFF, and I don't care if you never do one of my films. I know I have films pending. I know that they will be shown in TIFF, and if what I'm saying now blocks that, the hell with you, okay? People need to know that the culture in Canada, even the artistic culture in Canada, is turning fascist and against Jews. Thank you very much, Newton, Mass. Watch Party in Chicago. What about pocket nuclear? Well, as I said, pocket nuclear, which is micronuclear, is a real thing. You can find it on any nuclear sub, on any nuclear aircraft carrier. They go into the ground and they generate the hot rods, which are enriched to 3.5%. The hot rods boil the water. That water is captured and it powers one home, maybe a cluster of homes, maybe a cul-de-sac, and with proper safeguards, and we feel that we are there, that can be done. This is the type of nuclear reactor that our friend from Tesla, Elon Musk, is talking about putting on the moon. So pocket nuclear has been discussed for years, and now they've got a demonstration project at the Idaho National Labs to make it a reality. I'm in favor of that, but I'm also in favor of many other forms of capture. What's important is this: all of these streams of energy for the home, the rain coming down your gutters, the snow melting down the gutters, the wind hitting the roof and being captured by little revolving cups, not giant windmills. The fact that when we walk on our floors, we create a pressure. All of this creates electricity, and all of this needs to be captured, funneled, and put into these power walls, which are just giant batteries, and those will power the entire house. And what they don't use at night, they will then power out to other microgrids. I'm very much in favor of this. It's called distributed energy. That confuses people because they know the grid distributes. So just think of it as decentralized energy. Good question. Mark in Vancouver, this just came in. Are there similar suits like the UNRWA suit waiting to be filed by Mr. Heidemann? Is Mr. Heidemann still with us?
Yes. A number of law firms have, in addition to ours, have filed multiple cases. We've already filed suits against the Islamic Republic of Iran, which has been held accountable in numerous federal court decisions for providing material support for Hamas. And so we've sued Iran as a result of October 7th on behalf of approximately 200 people. In addition, the Syrian Arab Republic. Now, this is an interesting matter. We've been filing suits and collecting judgments against the Syrian Arab Republic for more than 20 years. We've also sued them on behalf of victims of October 7th. Those cases are pending. But Edwin, you commented earlier quite accurately that Ron Dermer, Israel's former ambassador here in Washington and Israel's Minister of Strategic Affairs, has just had this face-to-face meeting with the foreign minister of Syria. This follows the president having met with the former terrorist, now president of Syria, who ousted Assad. Now, numerous law firms, ours and others, are holding billions of dollars of judgments against the Syrian Arab Republic. Although Assad is off with what is reportedly $150 billion of gold and other assets, and he's sitting in Moscow reportedly, the fact of the matter is the government of the Syrian Arab Republic simply has what I'll call a new administration. They announced that they would be the administration for 5 years and then there would be elections. Don't be surprised, as you said, Edwin, and as you and I have discussed in private conversations, don't be surprised to see the president push forward not just the sanctions relief that he's already engineered and announced, but see him move forward with removal of the Syrian Arab Republic from the State Department list of state sponsors of terror. Now, why do I comment on this? Because when Libya was removed by President George W. Bush in 2008, it was pursuant to an agreement between Libya and the United States government, pursuant to which Gaddafi paid $1.5 billion to the U.S. Treasury. All that money went out to victims and their families, as well as to legal counsel working on a contingent fee. And that $1.5 billion was paid out essentially at $10 million a death and $3 million an injury. Every single American who had a pending claim against Libya was included. When Sudan was taken off the list a few years ago, they paid $335 million. That went to certain cases, but not every American victim. So I will share with you that our firm, which is registered with the House of Representatives and the United States Senate, has written to every senator, has written to every member of Congress, has written to the administration, demanding that if Syria is indeed taken off the State Department list of state sponsors of terror and their immunity, shall we say, is restored, that they be required out of Syrian frozen assets and out of future commerce to be able to compensate American victims. We have an economic interest in that, of course. Let's move on to other cases. We've also sued North Korea. Now, other law firms have filed some additional cases. One was just dismissed yesterday, unfortunately, in the Eastern District of Virginia against American Muslims for Palestine. That's the organization that essentially follows the old Holy Land Foundation that was held up and indicted and charged in important litigation that was ongoing in Chicago. There are other cases that already have been filed by different law firms against Al Jazeera and others. We're looking at a number of additional cases. We've actually reached out to some of the nonprofit funds that have graciously said they're going to allocate some money to help cover some of the costs that need to be incurred for experts, for research, for investigation. I'm not going to comment on what those cases are. I will simply say to you that in the spirit of seeking justice and accountability, each entity, each government, each organization, each charity, each funder, even those who are in the news industry that provide material support to the terror organizations should be held accountable. Lastly, We are working with Congress to change the law because although Congress adopted the Anti-Terrorism Act and later the JASTA, which allows for prosecution in civil courts for aiding and abetting terror, most federal judges are turning those cases away in spite of the specific intent of Congress that legislation was intended to give access to American victims, to have access to the courts, to seek to hold accountability. But judges are dismissing them on jurisdictional grounds and dismissing them on failure to state a cause of action grounds. What do they mean when they say that? Well, the judges have said you have to prove that the donor knew that when the funds were contributed, they were going to be used to fund terror, maybe not to commit a specific act of terror, but that there's a new knowledge component that the courts have written in. So what Congress said has been overridden by the courts. There is legislation pending. We're working with various members. And so to answer the question, yes, there are other cases already filed. There are cases being decided adversely, cases under consideration, cases that need to be filed, and it needs the support of each and every one who wants to stand for justice and accountability. That includes not just UNRWA, but that includes many others I could comment on, but I hope I've covered enough to answer your question. Thank you, Edwin.
You have answered it, but I have a thought for you, Richard, in terms of Syria. So Assad is sitting up there somewhere in Russia with $1 billion plus in plundered state money. What about an extraterritorial lien on that money, and then which would be approved of by the Sharia ISIS 3.0 regime, and then that would be used to pay prior claims?
So in the cases where we have judgments against Syria, that's a judgment out of a U.S. district court. Taking the U.S. federal court judgments to another district court in the United States is indeed doable. Now, when you go to do it extraterritorially, as you just indicated, you have to meet the criteria of the local government. The government of Italy, for example, was reviewing the possibility of executing attached Iranian assets and decided not to do so because it would interfere with their foreign policy. In the UK, however, in one of our cases, on behalf of the underwriters of an airplane that was hijacked and destroyed, the Lloyd's of London underwriters, through our firm and the firm we work with here in Washington and firms that we brought in the UK, actually have obtained an order from a UK court that domesticates our judgment and allows attachment. Now you got to find assets that you can attach. To conclude, it is possible, but if anybody thinks that so fast the government or the courts of Russia are going to permit the registration of a U.S. district court judgment and then attachment on Syrian assets, it's going to be expensive, it's going to be difficult, it's going to be a huge challenge, it'll be viewed diplomatically, and we have that issue and that challenge with 190 some countries around the world. What we need to do is find governments that are indeed willing to say attacks by terror organizations funded by terror governments ought to permit those governments to be held accountable, Syria and others, and therefore assets should be able to be attached. And it shouldn't even need the necessary agreement of the new regime in Syria. But having that agreement should make it easier because that would remove the obstacle of interference with foreign policy. There are governments who protected Assad for decades. The Assad family, for 50 years controlled Syria. Now it's not about Assad. Can we recapture those monies? Can we attach them? And can we rechannel them for American victims of terror? That's a challenge we're working on as we speak. Thank you for asking, Edwin.
All right. So our last question we're going to take, we're running over, is from Bruce in Eastern Ohio. I think I'm reading this correctly. I'm modifying it. Please explain why transformers at local power stations are not custom made for the area and time to be replaced after any EMP. When an EMP hits, it sends out an electromagnetic pulse that fries the wires. You can't reconnect them. You can't grease them up. You can't give them another jolt. You have to replace them. And that means every connection in your car, every connection in every electrical device, every connection everywhere will have to be actually replaced. Thank you, Bruce. I hope I got the essence of your question. And ladies and gentlemen, we're out of time. I want you to hold for my closing word of wisdom, just 2 minutes away. But first, I want to thank my very knowledgeable guest, Richard Heidemann. Plus, I thank my talented international team, including Carol in Maryland, Sims in South Africa, John in Japan, Christine in Indiana, and Holly in Nashville, as well as many others in numerous additional cities around the world. I'll see everyone back here in 2 weeks at 3 p.m. Eastern. You want to be a friend of the Edwin Black Show? Go to theedwinblackshow.com/support. Keep me independent. You want to hear me in person? Watch my website for events. Consult my events page at edwinblack.com. Until then, head over to any Barnes & Noble in the USA or any Amazon, Walmart, iTunes, Google Books, Kobo, or Audible.com platform in 190 countries across this roiling, toiling, boiling planet where you can find any of my 300 book editions, such as IBM and the Holocaust, and my latest scoop book, Israel Strikes Iran. You want an autographed copy? Hit edwinblack.com and click books. Get access alerts to participate live in future shows at theedwinblackshow.com. You'll see a much enhanced and exquisitely produced version of this show and prior episodes by subscribing to our YouTube channel at The Edwin Black Show and click the notification like scores of thousands of others have. Follow me at Edwin Black Book on X as well as Facebook. And now for my closing word of wisdom. Sleepwalking is not a prescription for survival. I'm zooming out from our nation's capital. Bless all of you. Pray for all that is unfolding before our very eyes.